Yeah, we're towards the bottom of Kuf Chav Gimel Amud Aleph. Kuf Chav Gimel Amud Aleph. Amud Beis, I'm sorry, yeah. Amud Ab Chanina. Yesterday we learned the Braisa Benegea to Barishaina. The Braisa began Barishaina, explaining when the Isser of muktzeh began. And the Braisa said that in the beginning they assered all kalim, all kinds, everything, that a person should not be allowed to use anything. And then they were matamor. Once they saw that people were keeping Shabbos, so they were matamor, until finally we have the halachas of muktzeh the way it is today, that's much more lenient than it was originally. So the Gemara now says, when it says in that Braisa Barishaina, when was that? Amar Ab Chanina b'mei Nechemia ben Chachalya, Nishnis Mishnazu. What it says over here about the Isser of muktzeh the way it was originally, that was in the times of Nechemia. Tichsiv, as it says in the pasuk in Nehemiah, Vayamim haheim re'isi b'Yehuda derchim gitais b'Shabbos. I saw in Yehuda people were pressing olives and vats on Shabbos. Umeviyim ha'areimos, they were bringing the heaps in from the field. So they were very lax with keeping Shabbos. So because of that, he made the gzeira of muktzeh extremely, extremely stringent in the beginning in order to get people to remember and to keep Shabbos.
The whole Indian of muktzeh is gzeira d'Rabbanan?
As we see over here, it started b'mei Nechemia already. B'mei Nechemia, which is a Navi. No, it's for sure not Teiraisa, but it started in the times of Nechemia. Actually, the interesting thing is, the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch says that Be'emes it started earlier. It started b'mei David Shlomo. We had it in the Gemara before. It spoke about when David HaMelech passed away, and there was the Indian of muktzeh then also, not to move a mace on Shabbos. So the Indian of muktzeh applies before. The Alter Rebbe says that in the times of David Shlomo there was the Indian of muktzeh that applies to something that's b'chlal not roi for use, has no like something stam, something that's not a keli b'chlal or a mace that has no use for Shabbos. That concept of muktzeh existed even before. Nechemia, he instituted muktzeh even when they get to kelim, even when they get to things that have use, and sai when they get to kelim that have a heter use or permitted use, and even for sure kelim that have a forbidden use. That's the chiddush of Nechemia, that they were machadash the union of muktzeh. But then, later generations, as we learned yesterday in the Gemara, so they said if it's l'tzairich gufay or l'tzairich mekayma, if you have a purpose to use it, so you're allowed to move it. But the Alter Rebbe says, even after all the hatarim over here in the Gemara, to move something for no purpose, to move a keli for no purpose whatsoever, you have no use for it, not l'tzairich gufay, not l'tzairich mekayma, and not l'tzairich atzmai, for its own purpose itself. Stam, just to move around something, that heter was never made. That original gzeira of Nechemia, that you should not move things on Shabbos, remains. The Gemara only talks about moving things for a specific purpose, but stam, to move something without no need or purpose whatsoever, you're not allowed to move it. In that sense, the gzeira of the Bizman Nechemia stays.
Only if it's melachta le'isa.
Even melachta leheter.
Wow.
Yeah, if it's for no tzairich whatsoever, not l'tzairich atzmai, not l'tzairich gufay, and not l'tzairich mekayme, the gzeira of Nechemia stays. Amar Rabbi Lazar said there are three different mishnas. One talks about konin, which is the poles or rods. Tubes, that's a better word. Okay, thank you. Konin, tubes, these are the tubes in the Mishkan, as we'll see, or in the Beis HaMikdash. Maklois, sticks, or staffs, glustera, and the knobs, umeducha, the crushers, mortar, a crusher. Kulam, and so we're going to have over here different mishnahs that are going to talk about muktzeh regarding these items. Kulam kaidem ataras kelim nishna. All of these mishnahs that talk about muktzeh in these cases is speaking about when they instituted muktzeh originally before the hatarim. Before the hatarim that we explained over here, because once there was hatarim, then there's no reason for this muktzeh. So the Gemara starts. The Tznan. We learned in the Mishnah regarding the tubes that are used in the shulchan for the lechem aponim. So how is the lechem aponim put in the Beis HaMikdash? You had the lechem aponim that were lined up 6 on each side in the shulchan, and there were there's the menakiyos and the ksavos. There's the boards on the side, and then there's the tubes that were sort of the shelves that they stacked up the lechem aponim, right? 6 on each side. So in order to be able to stack them up, they couldn't fit in the bread between the shelves. So how were they able to put in the bread in the shelves? They had to take out the tubes, put the bread in one shelf, put back in the tubes, next shelf, and this is how they stacked it. On Shabbos, they were not allowed to do this. That's what it says in this Mishnah. Lo siddur hakonin, not arranging these tubes that were the shelves for the lechem haponim, v'lo netilasan, and not removing them to be able to fit it in. Doiches haShabbos. This is not doiches Shabbos. So therefore, Rashi says, how did they do it? So before Shabbos, they would remove all the konim of the shulchan, and the bread, the lechem haponim that was there, was just stacked one on top of another, and there was no space between them. And then they came Shabbos. Every Shabbos they brought fresh lechem haponim. So then Shabbos they removed the lechem haponim and they brought the fresh lechem haponim, but they didn't line them up on the shelves on the konim because it was muktzeh. And then muktzeh Shabbos they were able to put back in the shelves, the tubes, and then they were able to line it up properly. But on Shabbos they just had to be stacked one on top of the other, the bread. So this, over here we see that there's a muktzeh b'negeh to these konim. This must be before they made the heter. I mean, this is something that l'tzayrich gufay, to use it for the purpose of these shelves itself, it should be mutter. So this is before they made the heter. From the times of Nehemiah, there was a issa to be allowed to move this. That's one case. And now maklois. The other case that applies to staffs. So this is, it says in the Mishnah b'negeh to the Korban Pesach. So on Erev Pesach, when they brought the Korban Pesach, there were a lot of people bringing karbanis there, and they all had to skin the animal, remove the skin of the animal. How was this done? Where was the space to do this? So it says in the Mishnah, Na'an maklois daken v'chalokin hoyisham. There were thin, smooth staffs that they had. Umanichai al kseifoy v'al kasav chaveiroi. And you would put one side of the staff on your shoulders, the other side on another person's shoulder, with tailo mafshit. And in between you hung the animal there to be able to remove the skin of the Korban Pesach. So it says there in the Mishnah, Omar Rabbi Lazar, or the Ger says Rabbi Lazar Omar, Rabbi Lazar Omer, that Arba also Shechali is b'Shabbos. If Erev Pesach falls out on Shabbos and you're bringing the Korban Pesach on Shabbos, so then you're not allowed to move this stick for this purpose. It's muktzeh. So instead, what do? Maniach yodai al kesef chaveri v'yad chaveri al kseifa. You put your hands on your friend's shoulders, and your friend's hands on your shoulders, and v'toile, and you hang the animal on your hands, umafshit, and you can skin the animal that way. So again, you see in this Mishnah that in that time period, muktzeh applied to these sticks, that they weren't allowed to use it on Shabbos. Once they made the heter, that l'tzayrich gufay, that for its own purpose, to use it for something, it's allowed, it shouldn't be muktzeh. They were able to use these sticks for this purpose. The third case, glustera, a knob of a door. The Tnan, it says, nager sheyesh bereishe glustera. So this is a bolt in a door that has a knob connected to it. And you want to move it from one door to another door. Rabbi Yeshua says you can't touch the knob itself to remove it and to put in another door. Shaimta min pesach zeh. So if there's this string attached to it, you can pull it out of the door and you could drag it, but you can't touch the knob itself. V'tayle b'chaveiroi b'Shabbos. And you can, like that, bring it to another door and put it into another door on Shabbos. But to touch the knob itself, it's muktzeh. Rab Tarfa says, Harehu kechol hakelim u'metaltel b'chotzer. Rab Tarfa says, no, this knob is something that's very usual that you move it, at least in those times. This is something that was removable, and they moved it from one door. They used this knob from one door to another door. So it's like food that a person can touch and move around. You're allowed to move this knob in Shabbos. But you see from the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua that this knob, it was muktzeh. You're not allowed to use it, even though it's l'tzayrich gufay. You need its use itself for another door. It says there you could only drag it, but you can't touch it itself. So this is again before they made the heter for all these things that are muktzeh. The last case, meducha, the case of a garlic crusher or a mortar. Hada maran, we mentioned already before a few times, this Mishnah of meducha, where it says that the meducha is not allowed to be used unless there's actually garlic inside. But if it has no garlic inside, you're not allowed to use the garlic crusher, even if you need the garlic crusher itself for something that's tzayirich gufay. The Gemara before brought up a few pshatim of this, but the Gemara here now is saying that Mishnah about the garlic crusher is talking about before they made the heterim for muktzeh. The original gzeira of muktzeh, you wouldn't be allowed to move it. Amar Rabbe, so Rabbe responds to this and says, Mimai, how do you know? So this was who Rabbi Lazar said this. Rabbi Lazar said, all these Mishnahs has to be speaking about before they made the heter. So Rabbe says, how do you know? Really, I can tell you, La'acha hataras kelim nishno. All of these Mishnahs is in the time period, which is l'chayr, in the time of Chazal in the Mishnah, it was already after they made the heter for muktzeh to be used l'tzayrech gufay and l'tzayrech mekaymai. It's after already that time period. So now he goes through all these Mishnahs to explain the pshat. Konim, when it comes to the tubes that they used in the Beis HaMikdash for the lechem aponim, taimim, what's the reason they need this konim for them? Why do you stack up the lechem aponim on top of these shelves of the konim? Mishum pushi, so that it shouldn't get molded. If the bread, it could be hot also, and it's stacked one on top of the other, it's going to get moldy. Bahai porte, loy meyapish. So on Shabbos, those few hours on Shabbos where they put the new bread and they stack it one on top of the other, it's not going to get moldy. So therefore, it's not necessary to move the konim, and if it's not necessary to move it, so that there's no tzayich whatsoever, so therefore you're not allowed to move it. Maklois, the same thing also with the staffs that they use to hang the carbon pesach on it to be able to skin the animal. So since there's another eitzah that you can place your hands on your friend's shoulders and your friend's hands on your shoulders, and you can hang the carbon pesach that way, so you don't need to move it, you don't need it, and if it's not needed, so then you're not allowed to use it. Glustere, the same thing also with a doorknob. So here he says, you could say that the machlokes is a completely different kind of machlokes, nothing to do with muktzeh. Right? We had it before, it was a machlokes between Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Tarfon, whether you're allowed to move the doorknob or not. So he says it's a whole different machlokes. Rabbi Yanai said, we're talking over here about a chotzer that doesn't have the eruv chatzeris. You're not allowed to move anything from a house, which is a private domain, to a chotzer, which is a shared domain by a lot of people. This is the gzeir of Chazal without a eruv chatzeris. So over here, the person wants to take the knob from the door through a courtyard to another door. And what's the machlekes? Rabbi Yeshua's opinion is toich ha-pesach kilifnim dami. The doorknob, which is inside the hollow part of it, it's inside the door. That's like inside. It's like inside the house, and therefore v'kometaltul moned the batim b'chatzer. It's like you're taking an item from inside the house in a private domain and you're carrying it out into the chatzer, which is a public domain. So therefore, you're not allowed to carry it that way. Rab Tarfon so far, but Rab Tarfon's opinion is toich ha-pesach kilchutz dami. The doorknob, which is in the door, even though it's inside the door, but yet it's like it's already outside. It's not like the kalim that are inside the house. It's like outside in the chatzer. Umane the chatzer b'chatzer kametaltel. Anything on Shabbos, which is in the chatzer from the beginning of Shabbos, within the chatzer itself, you're allowed to move around the kalim that are there in the chatzer. So this doorknob is allowed to be moved around on Shabbos. Yeah, that's what the machlokes of Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Tarfon is about. It has nothing to do with the inyan of muktzeh. Okay. Now the last thing, and this is something we mentioned before already, the case of meducha, a garlic crusher, and you want to use a garlic crusher not to crush garlic because that's also on Shabbos, but you want to use it for a different purpose. So the Gemara says this also doesn't have to be before they made the heter of muktzeh. Rab Nechemia, as we said already before, that Mishnah could be going according to Rab Nechemia. Rab Nechemia holds you're not allowed to use a keli only for its purpose, what its designated purpose of use. Right? We had this before, and we're going to have it over here in the next Mishnah. We'll see Rab Nechemia's opinion. Rab Nechemia was very machmer, b'negei to muktzeh, that you could only use something for its intended use. And that Mishnah of the meducha goes according to this shit of Rab Nechemia.
Difference between Nechemia and Chachalia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Nechemia ben Chachalia was the Navi. This is Rab Nechemia. Zok the Mishnah. Kol ha-kelim, all kelim, nitalim, letzayrech, could be moved around for if it's necessary for using it, v'shalei letzayrech, and if it's not necessary to use it. Now, it's very unclear what the Mishnah is talking about. The Gemara will explain. Rab Nechemia says, ein nitalin elo letzayrech. You could only move around kelim if it's necessary for a purpose. Now, what are we talking about? Zok the Gemara. Mai letzayrech or mai shalei letzayrech. What does it mean you're moving around the kelim for a need, for a purpose, and if there's no purpose? Amar Rabbe, so Rabbe explains as follows. So here there's going to be a similar machlokes to Abaye and Rava that we had before regarding muktzeh. So Rabbe is more machmer. Rabbe says letzayrech means letzayrech means dava shemalachta leheter. If it's a keli that is designated for permissible use, letzayrech gufay, so you can use it letzayrech for it to use it itself. Shalai letzayrech means in the Mishnah over here dava shemalachta leheter letzayrech mekaymai. If you don't need it itself, you just have to use the space that it's on. So that's the pshat letzayrech. Letzayrech means you're actually using this tool itself. or this keli itself, shalei l'tzarech means you don't need it itself, you just need the space that it's on. That's regarding a davar shemalachta leheter. Davar shemalachta le'iser. If it's a tool that's used for forbidden use, so then l'tzarech gufay in, l'tzarech mekaymai loy. If it's l'tzarech gufay, if you're using it for its own use, then it's mutter. For the space that it's on, so then it's not allowed. Right? So when the Mishnah says kol ha-kelim, all kelim could be used, whether it's l'tzayrech, whether it's shalei l'tzayrech. That's talking about the kelim shemalachtam laheter. If they have permissible use, you can move it, whether it's l'tzayrech gufay, whether it's l'tzayrech mekaymai. When it comes to kelim that is malachtai le'iser, you can only use it if you need it itself to use it for something, but not to make the space for it. Also, Rav Nechemya l'meima. So according to this pshat, what's Rav Nechemya saying? Afilu davar shemalachtai laheter. Even if it's an item which is used for permissible use, l'tzayrech gufay in, l'tzayrech mekaymai loy. You could only move it if you need it itself, like for example a fork, a knife, all these things. If you're using it for eating, for it itself, but not l'tzayrech mekaymai. Not if you have to clear the space, you need that space, you're not allowed to move it. That's Rabbe's pshat. Rava disagrees. Amalei Rava. So Rava says, and this is the same svara that Rava already mentioned. We learned it yesterday. L'tzayrech mekaymai. Moving something because you need this space, shaloi l'tzayrech kareslei. That's how you learn the pshat in the Mishnah when it says shaloi l'tzayrech. True, you don't need the keli itself to use it for something, but you need the space. So you do need to move it for the space. So why are you saying that that's called shaloi l'tzayrech? So Rava interprets the Mishnah differently, much more lenient. L'tzayrech, when it says in the Mishnah l'tzayrech, so davar shemalachta leheter, if it's something that's used for heter, bein l'tzayrech gufay, bein l'tzayrech mekaymai, whether you need it itself or you need the space that it's on, that's called l'tzayrech. Shalei l'tzayrech, what does that mean? Afilu mechama l'tzeil. You don't need it, you don't need the space, but you're afraid that it's going to get ruined in the sun, and you want to move it to a shade that it shouldn't be protected. That's what shalei l'tzayrech means. You don't need it at all, but it's for the purpose of that it shouldn't get ruined. Davar shemalachta le'iser, so according to this pshat, if it's something that's used for iser, l'tzayrech gufay or l'tzayrech mekaymai in, you're allowed to move it for its own purpose, for the space that you need. Chama l'tzeil, but to use it, to take it from the sun to the shade, like that, it has no tzayrech at all, that's not allowed. That's the pshat in the Mishnah. So l'tzayrech means, when it says l'tzayrech, it includes both l'tzayrech gufay and l'tzayrech mekaymai. Shaloi l'tzayrech is just mechama l'tzeil, to take it from the sun to the shade. Now, according to this pshat, v'asar Rav Nechemya l'meimar, Rav Nechemya came and said, v'afilu davar shemalachta leheter, even something that's used for permissible use, l'tzayrech gufay l'tzayrech mekaymai in, you could only move it for its own use or for its space. Mechama l'tzeil, but to take it from the sun to the shade, loy. Since you don't have any tzayrech for it itself to use it for anything or for the space, that's not allowed. So the nekuda here is that according to Rava, we don't distinguish between l'tzayrech gufay and l'tzayrech mekaymai, and we paskin like Rava. Even a keli shemalachta le'iser is allowed to be used or moved l'tzayrech gufay or l'tzayrech mekaymai. Yasav Rav Safra v'Rav Ache b'Rav Huna bar Chanina. So these three Amirayim were sitting together. The Yasvi v'Kamri, and they were discussing this machlokes between Rabba and Rava, and they said as follows: LeRabba. Ali b'de Rab Nechemya. According to Rab Nechemya's opinion, Hani Kairis, the tableware, the plates, bowls, and when you finish eating your Suda on Shabbos, Heichim etal talinon, how could you remove them from the table? According to Rab Nechemya, even according to Rabbi, the way he interprets Rab Nechemya, even a keli shemalachta laheter, l'tzayrech mekaima, to clear the space of the table, that's called shalei l'tzayrech, and you're not allowed. So how do we clear the table after the Shabbos Suda, according to Rab Nechemya? Amalahu Rav Safra answered, there's another heta for that. Midi dahava graf shalrei, this is a heta we learned already many times, when you have a basket or a bowl of waste that Chazal, because it's disgusting, Chazal suspended muktzeh and they allowed you to move it out. When you have the leftovers of a meal on the table, because it's dirty and it's disgusting, they allowed you to remove it from the table. That's the heta, even according to Rab Nechemya. This Gemara repeats the same conversation, or the same question was asked again and the same answer. Amalei Abaye l'Rabba. Abaye asked this question to Rabba. Lamar, according to the master, according to you, Aliba de Rab Nechemya, according to Rab Nechemya's opinion in the Mishnah, Hani Kaides Heichem Taltalinan Lahu, how could we remove the leftover of the dishes from the table after the meal? Amalei, so he answered him, Rav Safra Chaverin Tirgama. Rav Safra, our friends, already answered this. Midi dahava graf shalrei. Like the graph, a bowl of waste, the Chazal allowed you to move it away. The same thing is with the leftovers on the table. Abai asked the question according to Rava's opinion that says that both L'tzorech Gufa and L'tzorech Mekayma are both allowed. And we had this question, the Gemara used this question already a few times before, and it goes over the same thing again. Meducha, the case of the Braisa says a garlic crusher. Im yesh bashum, if there's garlic inside, metaltal anaisa. You could move it. Vim lav, otherwise, a metaltal anaisa. You're not allowed. So why aren't you allowed? According to Rava, l'tzorech gufa, l'tzorech mekayma, you should be allowed to move it. Answers the Gemara, hacha b'mayaskinan mechamel etzel. That price, all it's saying is, if you have no use of it, you just want to take it from the sun to the shade, that even Rava agrees that if it's malachtoi le'isser, for the sake of it itself, you're not using it, but just to move it from sun to shade, that's not allowed. Eisvei, another question which we had before, B'shavin, both B'shameh and B'sil agree, b'negei to a pestle. That's also a keli shemalachta le'issa. Shem kitzav olav basar. So on Yontif they allowed you to cut the meat on it, but then after that she'asa l'taltlei. Because it's a keli shemalachta le'issa, you're not allowed to move it. Why? According to Rava, you're not allowed to move it. According to Rava, if it's l'tzorech gufay or l'tzorech mekayma, you're allowed to move it. Answers the Gemara, hachanami mechamal etzel. That over there, that Braisa is only saying that you're not allowed to move it if you have no purpose for it. Only mechamal etzel, that's when you're not allowed to move it.
What does that do with kitzer olav basar?
No, that's just that's because they had a machlokes before, whether it's on Yontif, you're allowed to use it for that, but it's not connected to this. Now it says in a Mishnah, so there's another case of a Shaila and Rava, there's a Mishnah in Beya, Ein Saimchen es hakedera bebakas. So you have a pot that needs to be positioned in the right, and you have to support it. So you're not allowed to take a piece of wood on Yontif, which is not muktzeh. Firewood on Yontif could be used in a fire, and therefore it's not muktzeh. But you're not allowed to take this bakas, this piece of firewood, to use to support a pot. V'chein bedeles, and so too to take a piece of wood to support a door in its place. Frag the Gemara. V'habekas, a piece of wood, to be Yontif, davish malachta lehetehu. A Yontif where you're allowed to make a fire. So this is something which is malachta leheter. You're allowed to move it. It's malachta leheter. So what do we see from here? Alma, davish malachta leheter. Even this piece of wood, which is designated for permissible use, bein l'tzorech gufay, and bein l'tzorech mekaymai, awesome. You're not even allowed to use it for it itself, that you need this wood to support a pot, but to support a door, you're not allowed. So this is a shaila on Rava. Maybe even a shaila, huh?
How do we know bein l'tzorech mekayma?
If you can't move it l'tzorech gufay, you can't move it l'tzorech mekayma. There's no difference between them, for sure. And for the Gemara, so Hasam, Hainu time over there's a different reason. Kivin the b'Shabbos dova shemalachtai le'isserhu, because this bekas, this piece of wood, firewood, on Shabbos it's not malachtai leheter. On Shabbos it's malachtai le'isser. It's firewood. It's also on Shabbos. So therefore they made a gzeira yomtiv otu Shabbos. There's a gzeira on yomtiv. You shouldn't move it, just like on Shabbos you wouldn't be allowed to move it. So the Gemara immediately clarifies. But v'chi teime Shabbos gufei tishteri. On Shabbos itself you should be allowed to move this firewood. The hadava shemalachtai le'isser l'tzorech gufei l'tzorech mekaymai shari. According to Rava, on Shabbos even malachtai le'isser you could move it for the sake of it itself or for the sake of the space. So if it's allowed on Shabbos, it should be allowed in Yom Tiv. So the answer is no. This is not a regular keli. That's when you're talking about something that's a keli. But over here, it's firewood. Firewood on Shabbos is not even a keli. But on Shabbos, firewood is not even considered to be a keli at all. If it's not a keli at all, so then there's no heta, not l'tzorech gufay and not l'tzorech mekaymai, and therefore, what's the point of the Gemara's answer? They made a gzeira. If on Shabbos you can't move it, they made a gzeira that you shouldn't move it on Yontif either. Even though l'chayr on Yontif it's a klisha malachta laheter, but they made a gzeira not to move it on Yontif, so you shouldn't come to move it on Shabbos. Frag the Gemara, migazrinan, do we find that we make such kind of gzeiras between Shabbos and Yom Tiv, that you shouldn't do something on Yom Tiv because you're concerned that on Shabbos you'll do the same thing? Vatnan, there's a beferish Mishnah in Beya as well. Mashilin peira is derech haruba. What happens if a person has peiros, vegetables or fruits that he's storing on the roof, and he sees that it's about to rain, and he has a skylight, and he wants to throw the peiros inside so it shouldn't get affected by the rain. So usually this is something which is a tircha, it's an extra tircha on Shabbos and Yom Tov. You're not allowed to do this. And at the Rabbanan, it's also for a person to be busy with this kind of things. But if he sees the rain is coming, so because the produce shouldn't get ruined, on Yom Tov they allowed him to throw it through the skylight. It's not such a big tircha. Avaloi b'Shabbos. On Shabbos you're not allowed to do this. So we see clearly that there's a chiluk between Shabbos and Yom Tov. We don't make a gzeira that if on Shabbos you're not allowed to do this, that on Yom Tov you're not allowed. Frag the Gemara, on the other hand, do we not find clearly that there is a gzeira, that we make a gzeira on Yom Tov not to do things because of Shabbos? But nan, we learned in another Mishnah, Ein ben Yom Tov l'Shabbos, ela oichel nefesh b'lvad. The only difference between Shabbos and Yom Tov is actually preparing food that you have to eat for Yom Tov, the heter of oichel nefesh. So it's mashma, other than that heter of oichel nefesh, we make a gzeira that whatever applies to Asr on Shabbos is Asr on Yom Tov as well. So we do make a gzeira. So we have now a stira over here when you get to this concept. Do we make a gzeira on Yom Tov because of Shabbos, or do we not make that gzeira? Rav Yosef, so Rav Yosef says it's a machlekes, like kashya, ha Rabbi Eliezer, ha Rabbi Yeshua. We see that this is a machlekes, and the Gemara brings a brayse that we had not long ago. The Tanya, we learned the case, what happens if you have two animals, a mother and a child, they both fell into a pit together. So what's the halacha? The mother and the child fell into the pit together, and it's on a Yom Tov. So what's the halacha about the Oisev as B'nai? You're not allowed to shech both of them. You can shech the behema on Yom Tov, but you're not allowed to shech both of them on the same day. So you can't take, Chazal didn't allow you to work them, to take them out of the pit if you're not planning on shechting it. So which one are you going to take out? So Rabbi Eliezer, Maile Sarishon, you take out one, Amanas l'sheichtei, in order to shecht it, and v'sheichtei, and you're allowed to shecht that animal. V'asheni, now you're shechting the first one, so the second one you're not going to be shechting. So oisele parnasa b'mkaimai, yeah, b'shul shalei yamas. You can feed it food over there in the pit that it shouldn't die, but you're not allowed to take it out because you can't shecht it on the same day. Rabbi Shua says no. Rabbi Shua was more lenient. You bring up the first one in order to shecht it. And then you sort of change your mind. We had this before. The Gemara calls this harama, subterfuge, right? The first bit, he changes his mind. And then and then you bring up the second one, and now and then you decide which one you want to shecht. So what do we see from here? The Gemara is using this. You see that Rabbi Yeshua is much more mekel on Yom Tov when you get to a person having this tirche to bring up both of these behemoths. Rabbi Yeshua is more mekel. Rabbi Eliezer was more machma. Rabbi Eliezer says you're not allowed. So the Gemara wants to apply the same thing when you get to the stira that we had. Are we more stringent to make a gzeira that Yom Tov should be like Shabbos, or are we more lenient that we don't make a gzeira of Yom Tov for Shabbos? So the Gemara says, just like we see over here, that there's an argument of how stringent to be on Yom Tov, we could apply the same machlokes to our case over here. So the Gemara says, no, it's not a comparison. How could you compare this machlokes here, beneged to the behemoths in the pit, beneged to our case, whether you make a gzeira on Yom Tov for Shabbos? Dilme at kan lekrama Rabbi Eliezer hasam. The reason why Rabbi Eliezer over there is more stringent, because the animal that's going to remain in the pit is not going to die. You can give it its food, feed it its food over there in the pit. If it's impossible over here, the person is going to leave the produce on the roof and it's going to rain, it's going to get all destroyed. So over here, maybe Rabbi Eliezer would be mekel as well. Or I could say, there's a concept of harama. Over there, the person brings up one animal with the intention to shech that animal, then he brings up another animal. So over there's a harama. In a case where there is no harama, that doesn't apply b'chlal. Maybe over there he doesn't hold of this heter, and he would agree to the gzeira. So this can't be the source of the machlokes whether you make a gzeira from Yom Tov to Shabbos. Elam Rav Papa. So Rav Papa gives a different answer. Loi kashya. The stira that we had, whether we made a gzeira from Yom Tov to Shabbos, from Shabbos to Yom Tov or not. So the machlokes is between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Ha Beis Shammai, ha Beis Hillel. The Tanan we learned in the Mishnah. Beis Shammai yoimrim. Ein meitzien es hakotten v'salulu v'sasefeteirel rishus harabim. On Yontif, you're not allowed to carry a child, a lulav, or a sefer Torah in the Rishus Harabim. Right? You're carrying them for no purpose. They're allowed on Yontif to carry eichel nefesh for the purpose of for food, but all these things is not the purpose of eichel nefesh. You're not allowed to carry them. Beisil matirin, Beisil mater, Beisil say once you're allowed to carry for the purpose of eichel nefesh, you're allowed to carry anything on Yontif. So here we see the source of the machlokes between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, that according to Beis Shammai, you're not allowed to carry anything, and the reason is because they, in the same we apply also when we get to the Gzeira from Shabbos to Yom Tov, that they made a Gzeira that Yom Tov should be also like Shabbos, but not according to Beis Hillel. According to Beis Hillel, you're allowed to carry whatever you want. So the Gemara asks, no, who says this is a comparison? Beis Shammai is talking about carrying in the Rishus Harabim. Tiltul mishamatlu. But before we were talking about tiltul, we're talking about muktzeh, to make a gzeira, to move the firewood, to support the pot or the door. That's just tiltul. Muktzeh, who says he would make the same gzeira and make the same issur regarding tiltul? So the Gemara answers, tiltul gufei lav mishum mitzahi. And the whole thing of muktzeh, isn't this connected to not carrying in the Rishus Harabim? So there's two pshatim in this. Either the pshat is that the whole gzeira of muktzeh is a siyag that a person shouldn't come to carry. That's one of the reasons. There's different reasons for the gzeira of muktzeh, but one of the reasons is that a person shouldn't come to carry. So therefore, whatever Beis Shammai says, benegea to carrying, applies to muktzeh as well. Rashi, it's mashma that Rashi learns, the pshat over here is that if you allow a person to move it, if you're going to be mezalzel in tiltul, he's going to come to carry. So therefore we say that the gzeira of Beis Shammai, that on Yontif you're not allowed to carry anything unless it's eichel nefesh, applies to muktzeh as well. You're not allowed to move anything that's muktzeh.
Gzeira, no?
If it's a gzeira.
Didn't we say that they were doing malachas? There used to be a huda that they were in Gita. You're
correct, it's true, but if you look weiter there in the continuation of the Psukim, you'll see that the main thing that he was concerned about is that they were carrying in a Rishus Harabim. So that's one of the main reasons for muktzeh. So now we go back to the original machlokes that we were speaking about between Rabba and Rava, right? So Rava's chiddush was that you can move, whether it's malachte leheter, whether it's malachte leissa, you can move it letzairich gufay and letzairich mekaymai. Va'af Rav saval ala hada Rava. Rav agrees to what Rava said. The Amar Rav said mar, a shovel, shelo yiganev. You're allowed if you're moving it to a secured place that it shouldn't get stolen. Zeu tiltul shalei letzairich. This is considered to be moving it without having any purpose to use it for it. The aser, and that's forbidden. So the Gemara now says, what do we see from Rav's statement? Taime shalei yiganev. Reason you're not allowed to move it is because you're just putting it in a secure place that shouldn't get stolen. Aval letzairich gufay or letzairich mekaymai mutter. But if you're moving it because you need its use or you need the space, that's allowed. So you see that Rav held like Rav as well. L'tzarech guf and l'tzarech mekayme is allowed. In fact, the Gemara, is this true? But Rav Kahana ikla lebei Rav. Rav Kahana came to Rav on Shabbos. V'omar, and Rav said they didn't have a chair for him to sit, and he said, "Aisule shusa lekahana, bring a trap." Which is a keli, which is malachte leisser, and let him be able to sit. Let Rav Kahana sit in it. Leisa v'le, and he can sit in it. So what do you see from this? Lav lemembra, doesn't this mean the dava shemalachte leisser, an item, in this case a trap, that's a forbidden use, letzairich gufay in, to have someone sit on it, you need it itself, that was allowed. But letzairich mekaymai, if you would just need its space, that would not be allowed. Loi, it's not allowed. And for the Gemara, hachi amalahu. No, this is what he was saying to them. Shkulu shusa mikame kahana. He wasn't saying that we're going to give Rav Kahana a trap to sit on it. He was saying make space for Rav Kahana, move the trap from the place in order for Rav Kahana to sit there. So Adarab, we see over here that Rav holds you could move something letzairich mekaymai. Another pshat, hasam michamal letzel have. There, that trap was in the sun. And when they were moving the trap, they were moving it to a place where Rav Kahana would sit, which would be in a place of shade. So therefore, it would look like you're moving this trap for a purpose that's only mechamal etzel. So Rav wanted to make it clear that you're not allowed to move it mechamal etzel. So he was saying that it's for the purpose of Rav Kahana sitting on it. But really, it's not only letzairich gufa, even letzairich mekayme, it would be allowed. Yeah, it's a marasayin kind of thing. Yeah. Rav Mari bar Rachel havaleahu. Beis had Yusuf b'Shimshe. Rav Mari bar Rachel, so he had pillows that were lying out in the sun. and they were getting ruined. Asala kamei de Rava, he came to Rava, Amalei, he said to Rava, Ma'ala taltultinu. Am I allowed to move it away from the sun? Amalei, Shari, you're allowed to. Right? This is Rava. Rava's opinion is that it's allowed even to move it from the sun to the shade. So he said, Isli achrina. I have enough pillows. I mean, even if these pillows get ruined, I have other ones. So am I still allowed to move it? So Rava answered him, you can use them for guests, so you have a use for it. You still can use it for your guest. So he said, no, I don't have any purpose to use these pillows at all, not even for guests. Isli nami lo'erchem. I have enough pillows even for guests as well. Amalei, so now Rav said to Rav Mari Barachel, Golas adaiteich. So now you revealed your opinion, the Kerabbe Svirulach, that you hold like Rabbe. And Rabbe's opinion is a Keli shemalachte leheter, to move it, that it shouldn't get ruined, mecham eletzel, you're not allowed unless you have a use for it. So Rava tells him, L'kul al mashari. For everybody else, it's allowed. But l'didach, if you hold like Rabbe, so then also for you, so you can't move it. Brooms that are made out of cloth. It's allowed to be used in Shabbos. Because these are brooms that are made to clear off the table, sort of small brooms to clear off the table. So that's a kelish and malachta leheter. Aval shel tomorrow, the brooms that are made out of from palm trees, from branches of palm trees, life that's not allowed. Rabbi Lazar says af shel tomorrow, brooms that are also made from palm trees, that's also not allowed to be moved on Shabbos. So the Gemara is going to try to understand,
If they can move them.
Again, af shel tomorrow, you're allowed to move them on Shabbos. Okay. Yeah. What are we talking about? What's the story with these brooms? Are we talking about a person that needs to move these brooms because he wants to broom, he wants to use it to broom the table or the floor, or mekaima, he needs the space, so that's not allowed? This Rav is going to say that if it's a broom made from a palm tree, it's not allowed. We said that Rav holds according to Rava that if it's l'tzayrach gufo or mekaima, you're allowed to move it. As the Gemara, Ela mechama l'tzeil. We're talking about a person that's moving the broom because it's going to get ruined, but he doesn't have any use of it whatsoever. That's what we're talking about. Frek the Gemara, if that's the case, Bahal, Leimer Rabbi Lazar, Af Shel Tomorrow, does Rabbi Lazar hold that even a broom that's made to broom the floor, that's also going to be allowed according to Rabbi Lazar? So Rashi explains, a very important point there for the Pshat of the Gemara, the brooms that are made to broom the floor is considered to be a Keli Shemalachtoi Le'isser, because in those days, you were not allowed to broom the floor, because you're flattening out the floor. Ashvuya Gumais, it's like building. You're flattening out the floor. So it's a Keli Shemalachtoi Le'isser. So if you're moving it only to take it out of the sun into the shade, everybody agrees that that's forbidden. So how would Rabbi Lazar say that would be allowed? And for the Gemara, we're talking about moving it from the sun into the shade. And the Eimeh, what you have to say there is V'chein Amar Rabbi Lazar. Rabbi Lazar didn't say that it would be allowed to move it. Rabbi Lazar said the same thing as Rav, that it would not be allowed to move it because it's a Keli Shemalachte Le'isser, which is not allowed to be moved. If you have no purpose for it, it's just Mechama L'tzeil.
Any kind of broom. Any broom.
In those days, any broom that's used for the floor. A broom that's used for the floor is Malachte L'issa. A broom that's used for the table is Malachte L'heter. Zok the Mishnah, Kol HaKelim Nanitalim B'Shabbos, all kelim that are allowed to be moved on Shabbos. So what happens if it broke? Shivreyen Nitalin Imaim. So broken pieces of this keli could also be moved. But that's only if those broken pieces have use as a keli. It could be used for something. So the Mishnah gives two examples. Shivrei areva, the broken pieces of a bowl, lachasis ben es piachavis. You could use it to cover a barrel. Shivrei zchuches, the broken pieces of glass, lachasis ben es piapach. You can cover a flask. That's the Tanakama. So as long as the broken pieces of the kalim have any use, even if it's not the original use of what that was when it was a keli, you're allowed to move it on Shabbos. Rabbi Yehuda argues, and Rabbi Yehuda says, the broken pieces of the keli have to still be usable for the original use of what it was made for. Which means, shivrei areva, the broken pieces of a bowl, or a big bowl, it could still be used to pour into it a porridge. So it could still be used for the original use. V'shal schuchis, or you have a broken piece of a glass, it's big enough that you could still use it to contain some oil in it. Only if it has its original use, then will it be mutter.
This is everything if it broke on Shabbos. What about night?
Oh, the Gemara is going to talk about that's what's coming right now. Amar Rav Yehuda Mashmul. So the Gemara is going to explain, when did this break? Did it break before Shabbos? Did it break on Shabbos? Amar Rav Yehuda Mashmul, Machlaikis. The Machlaikis here between the Tanakama and Rav Yehuda is Shenishberu me'erev Shabbos. It was broken from before Shabbos already. The Mar Savar, so the Tanakama, or actually Rav Yehuda holds me'ein melachton in, only if it has its original use, then it's allowed, then it's not muktzeh. Me'ein melacha acheres, but if it doesn't have its original use, so then it's not a keli for what it's intended to be, so it's not a keli anymore. Umar Savar, the Tanakama holds, afila me'ein malacha acheres, even if it's not used what it's usually used for, it's not its original use, but even if it could be used for something else, it's still a keli. So that's if it was broken before Shabbos. Avol nishberu b'Shabbos, if it was broken on Shabbos itself, divrei hakoil mutarin. Everybody will agree that it's mutter. Why is it mutter? Hoyel umuchanin al gabe avien mutter. If when Shabbos came in, it was still intact, it was part of the keli itself. So avien means the original keli, the way it was intact. So if it wasn't muktzeh when Shabbos enters, if it breaks on Shabbos, it's not muktzeh anymore as well. Okay? It's coming, 1 second. But at this point, the Gemara says, we go according to when Shabbos came in. Rav Zetroy asked a question, and this is a Mishnah or a Braise, Masechta Beya, regarding Yontif, Masikim Bekelim. So of course in Yontif you're allowed to put wood into a fire on Yontif. So it says there in this Braise, you're allowed to use Kelim. You take a chair, a wooden chair, and you could put it into a fire on Yontif. But ve'em asikim b'shivrei kelim. You're not allowed to take a broken chair, a broken keli. You're not allowed to use that for firewood on Yontif. So now the Gemara wants to understand, what are we talking about over here? The nishberu emis. When was this keli broken? Ilema the nishberu me'erev Yontif. If you say that it was broken from before Yontif, why shouldn't you be allowed to use it for firewood? Eitzim ba'al mininu. It's just regular plain firewood. Why? So that's allowed to be used on Yontif. Elalav b'Yontif. So we're talking about a chair, for example, that broke on Yontif itself. So therefore, it wasn't designated for firewood before Yontif, but it broke on Yontif itself. V'Katani, and what does it say here? Masikim b'Kelim. You could only use the keli if it's a whole chair and you want to use it for firewood. That you're allowed to move. That's not muktzeh. But v'Ei masikim b'Shivrei Kelim. Once the chair broke, it's considered to be muktzeh, and you can't use it on Yontif for firewood. So we see that even something that breaks on Yontif itself, we don't say that because when Yontif entered, it was already not muktzeh, so then it remains not muktzeh for the rest of Yontif. It breaks on Yontif itself, you can't use it for firewood. So therefore now the Gemara brings in Noilad. Ella, so rather we have to say, I itma hachi itma. We have to bring, Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel's statement was the opposite. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, machlaikis shenishberu b'Shabbos. The machlaikis in our Mishnah, between the Tanakama and Rav Yehuda, is if it was broken on Shabbos itself. The Marsava, the Tanakama says, Muchanu. Even if you could use it now for another malacha, you could use it for something. It's Muchan, it's prepared to be used for something else, and it's not muktzeh. Marsava, Rabbi Yehuda holds Nailadhu. Rabbi Yehuda holds that it's Nailad, that before it was made for one use, now it's for a new use, and therefore it's Asr. So basically the machlekes of the Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda over here is there an Isser of muktzeh of Nailad? Rav Yehuda holds of the muktzeh of Nailad, and the Tanakama doesn't hold of this muktzeh of Nailad. Aval me'erev Shabbos, if it broke already from before Shabbos, divrei hakoil mutarin, everybody will agree that if it has any use, it would be allowed to use it on Shabbos. Hoyel v'hochnu l'malachim me'bayit yom, since it was already prepared for use from before Shabbos. Okay, we'll stop over here.